Welcome back to Blackthornprod. I'm Noah. Now, a few months ago, I made a tutorial on how to create a simple platformer controller. The player with this controller could jump, even double and triple jump. However, the player didn't have any control over how high or low his character could actually jump. And so in this video, I'll show you how to make a jump that, depending on how long the player holds down space in midair, will get our character jumping higher or lower. This is very similar to how a jump works in a Mario game or Hollow Knight. For example, here I'll hit the space key and almost immediately release it. And so my character will do a quick little jump. And here I'll hold down space for a long time and my character, as a result, will jump very high. Just before starting, I wanted to give a big thanks to Wisp for supporting me and my channel via Patreon. Awesome, with that said, let's get started. So here I have an extremely basic scene set up with a platform and my cubic player character. To get this platform controller working, my player will need a 2D box collider and a 2D rigid body set to dynamic. This way he'll be affected by gravity and will, once having jumped, fall back on the ground. Also make sure the platform has a 2D box collider or the character will fall right through it. And I'll create a new C# script called player controller, add it to my player and open it up. So first of all, I'll get my player moving left and right using the left and right arrow keys. To do so, I'll need to grab a reference to my 2D rigid body, since we'll be using physics to move him around. I'll call my rigid body 2D variable RB and set it equal to the rigid body component attached to my player. I'll also make a public float speed variable that will be used to measure how fast our character moves left and right. Okay, right under this, I'll make a private float variable and call it move input. We will use this to detect whether the player is holding down the left or right arrow keys. Okay, in the fixed update function, which I remind you is used to manipulate all physics related aspects of your game, I'll set move input equal to input.getAxisRaw horizontal. In short, if you hold down the left arrow key, move input will be equal to -1, and if you hold down the right arrow key, move input will be equal to 1. Next up, I'll set my rigid body's velocity, in other words speed, equal to a new vector 2. For the x-axis, I'll use that move input value and multiply it with speed, and I'll just leave the player's Y position as is. And so now my player can move left and right, as you'll see if you jump into Unity. Type in a value for speed and test the game. Note that for a less snappy movement, you can get rid of raw right here. Okay, it's now time to get down to the meat of the video, making the jump. I'll start by making a bool variable called isGrounded. We'll use this to detect whether the player is indeed on the ground. If he is, then we'll let him jump. If not, he can't jump. To detect this, we'll basically be casting an invisible circle by the player's feet. And if that circle detects ground, then the player is good to jump. So I'll make a public transform variable called feet pose and a public float variable called check radius. In my update function, I can now set isGrounded equal to physics2d.overlap_circle. And in the parentheses, make the central position of this circle, which in my case will be the player's feet, and a radius, so check radius. Also very important, a layer mask. This will get the invisible circle detecting some objects and ignore others. For example, we may very well not want the player being able to jump if he is knee deep in water or some sticky surface. So I'll make a public layer mask variable called whatisGround and plug that in right there. So to recap, isGrounded will only be equal to true if this invisible circle collides with some ground. And so if that is the case and my player hits the jump button, which in my case will be the space key, but of course you can use whatever you like, the player should jump. So I'll type rb.velocity and this time set it equal to vector2.up multiplied with jump force, which is a float variable I'll add up right here right now. So let's test this out in Unity. I'll create a new empty game object called feet pose, give it a little gizmo so we can easily see it in the scene view, and parent it to my player. making sure to place it nicely by his feet and then drag and dropping it inside of this empty slot. No need to make the invisible circle huge, I'll just give it a radius of 0.3 and then type out some value for jump force, 10 for example. I'll also crank up my character's gravity so he quickly falls back to the ground and doesn't float like a balloon slowly downwards. Lastly, make a new layer called ground, set the platform to that layer and make what is ground equal to this newly made ground layer. This way all objects with this layer will be considered as places which the character can jump off. And hitting play, you'll see that my character can move left and right and jump. Awesome. Of course, if your jump doesn't feel right, keep playing around with the jump force and gravity values. Now that that's working, I'll make sure that my player can jump even higher if he holds down long enough. So I'll make another if statement, and this time checking whether the player is holding down the space key using input.getKey instead of input.getKey down. If so, then I'll copy paste this same line of code right in here. Of course, if we leave things like this, the player can get his character jumping higher and higher ad infinitum. So we need to put into place some timer that limits how high he can actually jump. So I'll make two new float variables, one private called jump time counter, the other public named jump time. And so in this second if statement, I'll make another, checking whether jump time counter is greater than 0. If it is, then the player can keep going higher and higher, and of course we'll gradually decrease the jump time counter value so that at some point this if statement will no longer return true. However, left like this, the player can hit space, start falling, and then in midair hit space again and do a sort of double jump, which isn't what we want. So I'll make another bool variable called isJumping and only allow the player to keep going higher if isJumping is equal to true. If the player stops holding down space, then that means he is no longer jumping. And so I'll set isJumping equal to false. I'll also set isJumping equal to false when the player runs out of juice. In other words, when jump time counter is less or equal to 0. And so now the player can no longer jump, fall a little, and then do another jump in midair. Of course, I'll now set isJumping back equal to true when the player hits space and is on the ground. I'll also make sure to reset jump time counter by setting it equal to the jump time value we will set in the inspector. And there we go. I can now head back into Unity and decide how long I'll allow the player to hold down the space key to jump higher before eventually falling back down. I feel like a value of 0.35 seconds is great, but again, this is really up to you and how you want your game to feel and play. So take your time tweaking these various settings until you're satisfied with the result. Lastly, a very simple way to get your character flipping left and right, depending on the direction in which he is moving, is by rotating him of 180 degrees along the y-axis. So if move input is greater than 0, that means the player is moving right, and so I'll leave his rotation with a value of 0 on all three axes. If however move input is less than 0, then I'll set the y value to 180 degrees, and you'll see that works really smoothly. Some people did mention simply using the flip option in the sprite renderer to do so, which is great if your character is made up of one single sprite, but if he was animated using a bone-based method, meaning if he's made up of more than one sprite, then using the sprite renderer's flip option becomes a little more tricky. And that marks the end of this platformer tutorial. I hope it was helpful and that you didn't get completely lost along the way. If however you did, definitely ask for help in the comment section down below. With that said, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's really appreciated and so encouraging. Also consider supporting me financially via Patreon like these top supporters. Even just $1 is absolutely wonderful. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. Cheers.